And my presentation today will cover an overview of how governments globally in the world's leading markets are enabling this accelerated transition to zero-emission vehicles through targeted policy action. To introduce ICCT, the International Council on Clean Transportation is an independent non-profit research organization, and it provides technical and scientific analysis to environmental regulators, and the mission is to improve the environmental performance and energy efficiency of multiple modes of transport for public health benefits and climate change mitigation. Through published research and other engagement with the public sector agencies, we try to leverage our collective expertise of a global network of specialists to promote national policies for clean and efficient transportation. Before we see the global electrification trend, we can see some of the aspirations of other countries that we have already heard from our previous speakers. For example, the European Union is spearheading towards carbon neutrality, and this chart shows the average CO2 value that has been going down and aimed targets of different countries also for the future. And as you can see, it's a progressive chart which goes down over the past and beyond 2020. And the targets set by some of the countries are quite ambitious. And the announcement for the EU in particular, there's a test set target for zero, which means they have to go 100% electric vehicles by 2035. So that means the blue dotted chart is touching the horizontal axis. And interestingly, the latest edition last week was the country Australia, which has set the start dates for 2025 and 2029, which is the latest edition in this chart. And this adoption of the CO2 standards, which is a very important regulation, and that has shown that Australia is also stepping up towards a critical tracking towards decarbonization goal. And that means that there is now the time for the emerging economies and the aspiring economies as well to step up and show the leadership by transforming its transport sector with right policies to reduce emission. Additionally, it's worth noting that in addition to the decarbonization sector, it's also important to understand the energy efficiency of the battery electric vehicles, which drives by one or more electric motors powered by rechargeable battery packs. And EVs offer several advantages over the conventional vehicles, where energy efficiency is one of the significant benefits. It is seen that EVs convert nearly 80% of the electric energy from the grid into power these wheels, whereas the conventional gasoline vehicles are converting about 17 to 20% of the energy stored in the gasoline to power the wheels, which means the energy efficiency comparison of these two categories. And on the right side of this slide, we can see some of the governments which have set out phase-out targets of combustion engine trucks, which is often considered as a hard-to-abate sector. And the government policies, which of course drives these phasing out of targets, would definitely include regulation, incentives, and strategic investments. Now we can see how these governments set up this ecosystem to grow the electrification market, and growth of these EV sales in some of these markets are quite impressive. So the key policy question is, of course, how to optimize this policy portfolio, and of course it also includes a lot of other factors which like charging infrastructure, which we have already seen in the past session. As you can see, the global momentum towards electrification is already on, and this figure shows the growth of electric vehicle sales from 2010 through 2020, and which have increased from a few thousands in 2010 to around 3.5 million by 2020. And we can see that the government's motivation to this transition is mostly driven by the need for stable climate, of course, and reduce fuel expenditure, reduce petroleum dependence, and clean air, especially for those disproportionately impacted by pollution. And equally motivating for many governments with considerable technology and manufacturing sector is the opportunity that they have seen, which includes the economic benefit of the emerging technology and its growing supply chain. So major economies like China, Japan, Germany, and United States, and other substantial automotive manufacturing is ideally understanding the face of risk in the industry, and they don't want to lag in the transition to electric vehicles. Now it's interesting to understand who leads in the production of EVs, whether it's the same ones where we can see the sales also. So as we can see, the biggest bubble, which is the red color, is China. It's the largest electric vehicle producer, and it accounts for nearly 44% of the electric vehicle production, followed by Europe, which is having 25%, and this accounts for 4.6 million and 2.6 million nearly. And of course, the United States comes nearly 18% of the cumulative global electric vehicle production. It can be seen that one of the major trends of the EV ecosystem over the years is the average price of the lithium battery pack, and it's of course one of the major components of the electric vehicle. And thanks to increasing the order size, that definitely impacted the growth of EV sales, and along with the introduction of the new pack designs, which includes the advanced cathode chemistry, and the falling manufacturing costs has definitely bringing down the cost in the near term. So this would mean that it's helping to maintain the utilization rate to reduce the cell and the battery packs. So nearly 80% reduction is seen for the cell price in the last decade. So one general comment that we have been seeing all these global markets is that the role of policies is quite important, as we have already seen from the previous session. And to reiterate here, the key government policies are the areas for action leading to, as also seen in the leading auto markets, which can accelerate EV transition, are the phase-out targets, which can set the market signals for the vehicle manufacturers, binding regulations, which include standards. Of course, CO2 standards is definitely going to be very important, and setting them to ambitious but realistic targets. Incentives, of course, in the early phase of the market, and sufficient charging infrastructure support, and adding convenience to the customers, and also additional awareness programs which can create the demand. One interesting narrative from the United States is the beachhead strategy that we can see from the state of California, which is way ahead than rest of the states. And as we know, finding your beachhead is one of the most important strategic moves you can make to set up a foundation of a business, especially for an early market. And California planned to progress the market over time by identifying the size of the requirement and further scaling. So it's like expanding the supply chain requirements and later steadily increasing the infrastructure volume and increase the confidence in the market, both on-road and off-road. Similarly, in the truck segment, what you can see is the California has introduced the ACT rule, which is nothing but setting sales target requirements for manufacturers, and that also, it's not a steady graph, it's a progressive graph. That means there is a gradual increase over the years, and that can be seen as a major impactful factor for the zero emission trucks, which is taken by the California Air Resource Board. For the passenger vehicle segments, this table shows what is the sales targets beyond 2020, and some of the passenger vehicle segments is written in a tangible aims, and the target percentage is given both for the battery electric or the plug-in hybrid and fuel cell electric cycles. So it can be seen that, for 2025, 2030, and 2035, how they are planning to have the tangible segments. Of course, I'm just repeating what is mentioned about the strategies. It involves definitely a pronged approach, which can be, of course, complementing the regulations such as incentives, facilitation of the stakeholders for public-private partnerships, which can combine the best use of expertise and resources for investments, planning for infrastructure to manage the EV smart requirements based on how it can be charged and the usage of clean energy sources as well. Some of the studies that we have done on the public charging infrastructure identifies how it is measured in terms of a metric, and it is definitely a key facilitating aspect to understand how it has been working in other countries as well. So the countries with most chargers per population have highest EV sales, and definitely home charging is convenient to the customers, but away from home charging, or in other words, the public charging, is very critical in achieving high EV share, and a reliable and dense charging infrastructure network, which is a kind of measure that we can see, which can definitely impact the broad transition to the electric vehicles, and local governments have a critical role to play in this. Also, the density of public infrastructure also can be understood comparing the country size and reflect the spatial distribution, and that is how the density is given as a picture. So this is a model that we use in our organization to describe the approach of the charging infrastructure and how to incorporate the current charging trend and the data available to adopt these parameters to reflect the expected changes over the years and the vehicle technology and home charging availability and the charging need. So ideally, you find out what is the charging requirements by location and how can the chargers be categorized. So this link shows how, in detail, how these charging gaps have been modeled based on these studies. This is a quick snapshot of major markets which has already rolled out massive investments for public charging built out through government policies. Starting from EU, you can see the 7 gigawatt public charging capacity by 2030. China, which has rolled to power 20 million chargers by 2035, and Canada, which has a commitment to install 50,000 new chargers. In May 2022, it is interesting to see that after the ZEV mandate, UK committed 1.6 billion pounds towards 300,000 public chargers. And US proposed the National EV Infrastructure Program, which will draw the funding through the government and require installation of at least 4 150 kilowatt DC chargers to be installed every 50 miles along the US highways. So this table shows some of the city-level interventions in providing support for charging infrastructure, and how in a local context this can make a lot of impact, starting from Beijing and Guangzhou, which basically are trying to give promotions for the wireless charging infrastructure, and even Guangzhou provided $300 per kilowatt for the battery swapping projects. And Beijing also encouraged construction workplace chargers and provided a subsidy to chargers with power not higher than 7 kilowatt, and $71 per kilowatt to chargers with power higher than 7 kilowatt. We can also see the Tokyo metropolitan government subsidizing these charges for residences or businesses, and even Paris offering a 50% funding for hardware installation costs for charging at multi-unit dwellings for home charging or taxi drivers. And I'm sure this is something that you have heard before as well, that utilities have a key play to play in installing or building the charging infrastructure, but exactly the role of utility depends on the regulations and the goals of the government and utility. And there are different roles that they can play. This ranges from China or Quebec, where the power companies have the authority to build and manage a larger share of some of the infrastructure, to the Netherlands or Northern California, where the utilities build cases and much more limited advisory role. So what is important is that the utilities are at least consulted in the process, as they understand how much power the grid can support in which areas, and they can help to streamline the installation of the infrastructure. Of course, one of the most important partners for planning charging will be charging providers, who are naturally experts in building and maintaining the charging, which are both quite important. And in a lot of the cases, we can see that the government will prefer to let the charge providers do all the work, rather than government adding stations directly. So that comes the picture of different business models in this ecosystem. So for public charging, we are seeing that sometimes a city may be able to secure charging expansion simply by providing land in the right of way for charging providers, which gives them definitely an attractive spot. This is a model that we saw in Sacramento, for example. Even for workplace or fleet charging, it can be advantageous to partner with charging providers, because they can set up smart charging solutions, and it also reduces the cost of installation and support the power grid. And when working with the charging providers, one best practices that we have identified is to require that some data to be provided to the government, and this could include utilization, energy provided, and patterns in terms of the time of day and the length of charge, which could help them streamline the whole process. So, of course, we as researchers have a self-interest to understand these, but we have found that this data is really valuable for cities for planning infrastructure and, of course, funding investments, and it measures the benefits for electric vehicles. So as we see, the right combination of policy work is definitely, I would say, that is the best thing that can happen for the electric vehicle ecosystem. Finance building capacity and vision to build momentum for raising awareness that would facilitate achieve the goal of sustainable mobility, and national policies from top down through legislation and funding have strong influence on sustainable mobility. That is definitely the top place. And of course, there are great opportunity for aspiring countries to leapfrog their existing legacy and technologies and practices for EV adoption and thrive in the ecosystem. So I would like to wind up by one small point, and it's also important to understand that planning of charging and EVs more broadly involves definitely a lot of uncertainty as well, and it's definitely a balancing thing that you have to do, and whether it's for the early adopters in the market or try to look at the mainstream. So it's a balancing act that we have to do, and stick to the proven technologies now or experiment with the new technologies or the cutting edge. And how do you balance the desire to lead and expand the market versus the risk of standard assets? So fortunately, there are a lot of other groups that have a lot of expertise in this space, so we don't have to do it on our own. So, and that gives us a lot of importance to the partnership that we have seen in some of the session earlier. So I would summarize with the key takeaways that I can give to the session, that transport definitely plays a vital role in the global conversation about sustainable development, and electric vehicles stand out as a most critical technology for decarbonization transport, and continued progress of energy efficiency is essential. Combining with the efficiency standards with the right policies and infrastructure support can significantly scale EV adoption. That's it from my side. Thank you.
A huge thank you once again to Dr. Anup there. Some excellent insights on e-mobility and empowering electric mobility, and some key takeaways there as well at the end. If you do have any further questions, of course, if we do run out of time, please do make sure to speak to any of our speakers as they come off the stage. If we do have time for Q&A, we have microphones just set up in the middle there. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we now move to our second panel discussion of the day with insights